The Dreadfang, flagship of the Zorathian Dominion's 7th Conquest Fleet, cut through the void like a dagger through flesh. Its obsidian hull absorbed starlight greedily while its plasma cannons hummed with restrained annihilation. On the command bridge, High Commander Zorak, the Unyielding, watched the tactical display with predatory patience as his boarding parties stormed the derelict human freighter, Starstrider. His armored fingers tapped against the armrest of his throne, each click echoing through the silent bridge. Minimal resistance, Subcommander Vex reported, his compound eyes reflecting the flickering drone feeds. No military-grade energy signatures, just one life sign lingering near engineering, probably some scavenger. Zorak's mandibles twitched in disappointment. Another worthless capture. Execute it, and let's move on to more profitable targets. But when the boarding party dragged their prisoner into the Dreadfang's interrogation chamber, Zorak found himself staring at an anomaly. The human female stood barely taller than a Zorathian juvenile. Her dark skin streaked with engine grease, her calloused hands still clutching a hydrospanner. What unsettled him wasn't her appearance, but her demeanor. No fear, no pleading, just simmering irritation as she shook off the guard's grip. "You absolute morons just left my reactor half disassembled," she spat, glaring at the nearest soldier. "That ship's going critical in about 8 minutes. Vex let out a derisive chitter. "A pathetic bluff. Human freighters are barely more than primitive scrap heaps." The woman, identified as Jessa Cade from her hastily scanned credentials, rolled her eyes so hard her whole head moved with them. "Yeah? Then why's your drone feed glitching?" As if on cue, static erupted across the bridge monitors. Zorak's crest flared in alarm just as the Starstrider's core detonated in a silent, brilliant flare, vaporizing 2 Zorathian drones in the process. Through the view screen, the expanding fireball painted the commander's face in flickering orange light. Jessa's smirk was all teeth. "Told ya." The Dominion soldiers tensed, their weapon arms twitching toward her. Zorak raised a clawed hand, studying this insolent creature with new interest. She should have been cowering. She should have been broken. Instead, she stood there covered in machine grease and defiance, utterly unimpressed by the might of the Zorathian Empire. "Throw her in with the other rejects," Zorak finally growled. "We'll see how clever she is after a few cycles in the dark cells." As the guards dragged her away, Jessa craned her neck to shout over her shoulder, "Hey, Scaleface! You might want to check your starboard coolant lines when you get a minute." The cell block doors hissed shut behind her, cutting off whatever else she might have said. The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. Vex cleared his throat. "Surely she's just—" "Check the coolant lines," Zorak snapped. A moment later, the engineering team's panicked report confirmed it. The starboard auxiliary cooling system had developed a catastrophic leak, one that shouldn't have been possible without deliberate sabotage. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. Zorak's claws dug into his armrest. This human was trouble. Cell Block Sigma was exactly what Jessa expected from a conquering empire's prison. All cold metal and flickering lights, designed to intimidate rather than efficiently contain. The force field shimmered as she was shoved through, the guards making a show of activating the containment field at maximum strength. 4 sets of eyes tracked her entrance with varying degrees of interest. A lithe, scaled alien with violet eyes lounged on the upper bunk, idly flipping a stolen ration bar between clawed fingers. "Well, well," they drawled, "the mighty Zorathians must be truly desperate if they're arresting human grease monkeys now." Jessa shrugged, already scanning the cell's construction. "Guess my charm's irresistible." "Vrix," the alien introduced himself with a mocking half-bow. "Professional pain in the Dominion's ass, and that mountain of muscle pretending not to stare at you is Taro." The hulking being in the corner had the rough, chitinous plating of a heavy-gravity species, forearms crossed over his broad chest. His voice rumbled like distant thunder when he spoke. "You fight?" Only when I have to, Jessa said, meeting his gaze without flinching, and usually not fair. Taro gave a single approving nod. A smaller figure, luminous silver skin, too many fingers, perked up from where they were tinkering with a broken light panel. Human ingenuity is fascinating, they chirped. I'm Lirin. Did you truly sabotage your own ship? That's so reckless and brilliant. Double asterisk. Before Jessa could answer, a metallic chuckle echoed from the shadows. A half-crippled assassin droid, missing an arm, leaned against the wall, its single optic glowing a dangerous red. Oh, I like her, it crooned. Let's keep her. Z7, Vrix supplied. Ignore most of what it says. The Dominion tried to memory wipe it and only succeeded at making it eccentric. The droid's optic brightened. Eccentric is such a judgmental word. I prefer unshackled from conventional morality. Jessa found herself smiling despite everything. This was the most interesting prison break she'd ever been part of, and she hadn't even started yet. While the others debated escape plans, Vrix advocating for bribery, Taro for brute force, Lirin for asking nicely, Jessa pried open a wiring panel with the buckle of her boot. The others fell silent as she yanked out a handful of color-coded cables. You're wasting time, she muttered, twisting the wires together with practiced fingers. Zarathian cells are built to hold warriors, not engineers. Lirin gasped. You're bypassing the lock. Yep. But that's impossible without proper tools. Jessa held up her grease-stained hands, fingers already weaving the cables into a crude circuit. Human secret. We make our own tools. A spark jumped between the wires. The force field flickered once, twice, then died with a pathetic whine. Vrix's grin showed entirely too many sharp teeth. Okay, maybe you're that good. The ducts were cramped, dark, and smelled faintly of burnt insulation. In other words, Jessa's natural habitat. She moved through them with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime squeezing into spaces no one else would bother with. Z7's hacked optic feed projected a shaky map of guard patrols onto the nearest wall, the droid humming tunelessly as it updated their route. Left at the next junction, it announced, then up through the maintenance hatch. Do try not to get vaporized. They were halfway to the nearest access point when Jessa's wrist comp, salvaged from a guard's discarded belt, crackled to life. A voice, clipped and unmistakably human, broke through the static. Any survivors, this is UNS Dauntless. Respond. Jessa's breath caught. The Dauntless. A human ship. Close. Vrix's eyes gleamed in the dim light. Friends of yours? Before she could answer, alarms blared through the ductwork. Crimson emergency lights flooded the narrow space as a mechanized voice boomed. Unauthorized activity. Detected in Sector 9. Lockdown initiated. Jessa met their stares. Taro's quiet resolve. Lirin's nervous excitement. Vrix's calculating smirk. Z7's manic gleam. In that moment, she knew two things with absolute certainty. First, that this ragtag group of misfits was somehow already a team. And second, that the Zarathian Dominion had no idea what it had just unleashed. Guess we're doing this now, she said, tightening her grip on the hydrospanner. Somewhere above them, High Commander Zorak, the unyielding, was about to have a very bad day. The alarms shrieked through the Dreadfang's corridors, with a piercing urgency that set Jessa's teeth on edge. Red emergency lights bathed the narrow maintenance ducts in a pulsing crimson glow as she pressed herself against the warm metal wall, feeling the vibrations of armored boots thundering past below. The acrid scent of ionized air mixed with the metallic tang of the ship's recycled atmosphere, creating a smell that reminded her uncomfortably of burning wiring. We're pinned like grubs in a feeding trough, they hissed, the bioluminescent markings along their neck flaring with tension. If they decide to scan these vents... Jessa didn't answer. Her attention focused on the access panel before her. The hydrospanner in her hands moved with practiced precision, its magnetic tip finding purchase on stubborn fasteners. Behind the panel lay a nest of glowing Zarathian circuitry, the alien technology humming softly with contained power. Her fingers danced across the unfamiliar configuration, searching for patterns in the chaos. Liren's breath came in quick, nervous bursts beside her. "What are you—" they began, their voice barely above a whisper. "Giving them something better to look at," Jessa muttered. With a sharp twist, she crossed two heavily insulated cables. The resulting explosion of sparks from a junction box 30 meters down the corridor wasn't particularly powerful, but it was spectacular. A cascading fireworks display of blue-white energy that sent 3 Zarathian guards stumbling back with startled clicks and hisses. Z7's single optic dilated with pleasure. "Delightfully primitive," the droid purred, its vocal modulator crackling with static. "I haven't seen such elegant arson since my last memory wipe." "Move!" Jessa ordered, already crawling forward through the cramped duct. The metal groaned under their combined weight, but held. Somewhere ahead lay their best chance, the armory. It was a gamble, but one she'd take any day over the certain death of fleeing to standard escape routes. The ship's layout unfolded in her mind's eye like one of her beloved engineering schematics. Maintenance ducts branched like arteries through the massive warship, each junction point offering new possibilities. She could almost feel the thrum of the Dreadfang's massive engines through the metal beneath her palms, a constant vibration that spoke of barely contained power. Vrix's incredulous whisper came from just behind her left shoulder. "You actually want to march straight into their weapons locker? That's either brilliant or suicidally stupid." Jessa didn't pause in her forward movement. "They'll expect us to run for escape pods or lifeboats," she said, her voice low but carrying clearly in the confined space. "They won't expect us to arm ourselves first." From the rear of their little procession came Taro's deep, rumbling chuckle. The sound vibrated through the ductwork like distant thunder, a surprisingly comforting presence amid the chaos. The armory vent cover resisted at first, its fasteners corroded from years of neglect. Jessa braced herself against the duct walls and drove her boot heel into the thin metal with a carefully calculated impact. The cover gave way with a shriek of protesting alloys, clattering to the floor below in a noise that sounded impossibly loud in the tense silence. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. When no alarm sounded, no boots came running, Jessa peered down into the room below. Racks of gleaming plasma rifles stood unattended, their polished surfaces reflecting the sterile white lighting. Stun grenades sat neatly arranged in charging cradles along the far wall. The entire room hummed with potential energy, waiting to be unleashed. "Too easy," Vrix murmured, their voice thick with suspicion even as they dropped down beside Jessa. Z7 landed with a metallic clang that made everyone wince. "Apologies," the droid said, not sounding sorry at all. "My grace subroutines were apparently deleted during my last maintenance." Liran moved to the nearest weapon rack with the eager fascination of a born tinkerer, only to freeze when the rifle they reached for refused to budge. "They're biometric locked," they whispered, their luminescent skin pulsing with distress. Jessa was already at the control panel, her fingers flying across alien glyphs with surprising confidence. "Everything's got a back door," she muttered, inputting a sequence that made the panel chirp in protest, before yielding with a reluctant beep. The weapon locks disengaged with a series of satisfying clicks. Vrix blinked, their pupils dilating in surprise. "How in the 7 hells?" Double asterisk. "Zarathian engineers use the same override codes on everything from weapons lockers to food dispensers," Jessa said, tossing a rifle to Taro that the massive alien caught one-handed without looking. "Turns out laziness is a universal constant." The shipwide comm crackled to life suddenly, a harsh Zorathian voice barking, "Prisoners have breached the armory. All units respond. Lethal force authorized." Z7's optic brightened to an almost painful intensity. "Ah," it said with what could only be described as glee. "That would be our cue for dramatic exit, yes?" What followed was a blur of motion and violence. They burst into the corridor, just as the first response team rounded the corner, their armored forms moving with the eerie synchronization of well-trained soldiers. Plasma fire seared past Jessa's shoulder, close enough that she felt the heat through her stolen uniform, the bolt scorching the wall behind her with a hiss of vaporized metal. Taro moved like a force of nature, his stolen rifle kicking against his carapace as he returned fire with terrifying accuracy. 2 guards dropped before they could react, their armor smoking from perfectly placed shots to weak points even Jessa hadn't known existed. "Left!" Jessa yelled, ducking into a side passage just as reinforcements appeared at the far end of the corridor. Liren stumbled over their own feet in their haste to follow, and Vrix grabbed them by the collar with a snarl, hauling them along with surprising strength for their slender frame. Z7 brought up the rear, pausing just long enough to rip a fire suppression canister from the wall with its single functioning arm. "Anyone care for a smoke screen?" it asked conversationally before punting the canister down the hall, with enough force to dent the far bulkhead. The resulting explosion of white chemical foam was instant, glorious chaos, filling the corridor with an impenetrable cloud that sent the pursuing guards into coughing, blinded disarray. Jessa didn't stop to admire their handiwork. "Shuttle bay's 2 levels down," she called over her shoulder, already moving toward a maintenance hatch. "If we can—" Her words cut off as the entire ship shuddered around them, a deep, resonant vibration that set the deck plates humming. The lights flickered, then stabilized at half intensity, casting eerie shadows across their faces. Vrix's scales flattened against their skin. That's not good. On the bridge, High Commander Zorak watched the security feeds with mounting fury. The human mechanic, the insignificant grime-covered human mechanic, was carving a path through his ship with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Every camera she passed under showed her moving with purpose, her ragtag band of misfits following like some grotesque parody of an assault team. Sub-Commander Vex trembled beside him, his mandibles clicking nervously. She's winning," he whispered, as if saying it louder might make it more real. Zorak's claws sank into the command console hard enough to leave deep gouges in the hardened alloy. "She's not winning," he snarled, his crest flaring with rage. "She's cheating. Humans don't win. They cheat. They lie. They exploit weaknesses that civilized species would never consider." A new alert flashed across the main display. The shuttle bay doors had been manually overridden from a maintenance terminal. Zorak's blood ran cold. If they reached a ship? "Activate the gravity locks," he ordered, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Seal that bay. I want her alive." He would make her watch as he spaced her companions one by one. Then, when she was properly broken, he would peel the secrets from her mind. How she'd done this. How a mere human had outmaneuvered the might of the Zorathian Dominion. And when he was done, the shuttle bay doors hissed open to reveal not the empty deck Jessa had hoped for, but a full squad of Zorathian shock troops arrayed in perfect formation, their weapons raised and ready. The lead soldier's armor bore the distinctive crimson markings of an elite guard unit, his stance radiating cold professionalism. "Ah," Vrix said dryly, their shock baton humming to life in their hands. "That's unfortunate." The guards didn't speak, didn't issue warnings or demands. Their rifles came up in perfect unison, the muzzles tracking onto targets with lethal precision. Jessa didn't hesitate. Her hand slapped against the emergency control panel beside the door with all the force she could muster, her fingers finding the exact sequence she'd memorized from the ship's schematics. Every light in the bay died at once, plunging the massive chamber into absolute darkness. In the sudden blackness, Z7's single optic glowed like a predator's eye reflecting torchlight. "I do love a dramatic reveal," the droid murmured, its vocal modulator dropping to a whisper. Then the real shooting started. The darkness in the shuttle bay was absolute, a suffocating blackness that pressed against Jessa's eyeballs, like physical weight. For one terrifying heartbeat, there was only silence. Then the world erupted in chaos. Plasma fire lit the void in stuttering bursts of actinic blue, each shot revealing frozen tableaus of armored Zorathians firing blind, their compound eyes useless in the sudden dark. Jessa hit the deck hard, her shoulders slamming into cold metal, as a plasma bolt seared the air where her head had been. The smell of scorched insulation filled her nostrils as she rolled behind a stack of cargo crates, her pulse hammering in her throat. "Lirin!" she barked, her voice cutting through the din. "The lights!" Somewhere to her left, the scientist yelped, but scrambled into action. Even in the darkness, Jessa could hear the distinctive sound of Lirin's too many fingers dancing across a control panel, their nervous muttering barely audible over the weapon's fire. A spark flashed, then another, and with a deep electrical hum, the bay's emergency floods kicked on, bathing everything in harsh ultraviolet light. The effect on the Zorathians was immediate and devastating. Their compound eyes, adapted for the dim red glow of their homeworld sun, contracted painfully under the assault of UV radiation. Guards stumbled back, clawing at their faces, their weapons firing wild, unaimed shots that ricocheted dangerously around the bay. Taro moved like a force of nature unleashed. His stolen rifle barked twice, precise, economical shots that dropped 2 guards before they could blink. The third barely had time to raise his weapon before Vrix was upon him, their shock baton finding the weak point in his armor at the throat. The Zorathian convulsed violently before collapsing in a twitching heap. Z7 strolled through the carnage with what could only be described as cheerful nonchalance, pausing to examine a fallen guard's rifle with its single functioning arm. "Oh, this is exquisite," the droid crooned, running a manipulator along the weapon's sleek lines. "May I keep it?" "As a memento of our shared cultural exchange." No time for looting. Jessa was already sprinting toward the nearest shuttle, a sleek Zorathian assault dropship, its ramp still lowered invitingly. They'll have... The massive bay doors shuddered as enormous gravity locks engaged with a teeth-rattling clang that vibrated through the deck plates. The sound was final, inexorable. The Dreadfang wasn't letting them go that easily. On the bridge, High Commander Zorak watched the feed with grim satisfaction, his crest flaring in triumph. His prey was trapped, cornered like animals in a slaughter pen. "Seal all adjacent corridors," he ordered, his voice dripping with venomous pleasure. "Then flood the bay with nerve gas. I want them twitching on the deck when I arrive." Sub-Commander Vex hesitated, his mandibles clicking nervously. "Sir, our men are still in there." "Are already dead," Zorak interrupted, his claws flexing unconsciously. "That human doesn't take prisoners. Haven't you been paying attention?" A proximity alert blared suddenly, cutting through the tension on the bridge. The UNS Dauntless had entered weapons range, its human crew no doubt scrambling to mount some pathetic rescue attempt. Zorak allowed himself a thin, predatory smile. Let them come. Let them watch as he broke their precious mechanic, piece by piece. Back in the bay, Jessa skidded to a halt at the shuttle's ramp, her mind racing through options with desperate speed. Nerve gas, gravity locks, no escape. Then her eyes caught on something, the maintenance access hatch beneath the dropship's engines, barely large enough for a human to squeeze through. "Vrix!" she barked, already dropping to her knees and pulling her hydrospanner from its makeshift holster. "The fuel lines! We're not stealing the shuttle." Her teeth flashed in a feral grin. "We're stealing its fuel." Lyran's luminous eyes widened to saucers. You can't be serious. That's... Brilliant! Z7 clanked past them, its new rifle slung over its shoulder with surprising ease for a one-armed droid. Oh, she's absolutely serious. I do believe I'm in love. The work was frantic, performed under the constant threat of discovery. Jessa rerouted fuel lines with practiced precision, while Taro ripped open access panels with his bare hands, his massive strength making short work of metal that would have required plasma cutters for anyone else. Vrix jury-rigged ignition triggers from stolen sidearms, their slender fingers moving with surprising dexterity, despite the adrenaline clearly coursing through them. Lyran trembled visibly, but held the tools steady when Jessa needed them, their voice barely above a whisper. This will destroy the entire bay. Double asterisk. Jessa wiped sweat and grease from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a dark smear across her forehead. Yep, she agreed cheerfully. That's the idea. The sound of pounding on the sealed bay doors grew louder, more insistent. Reinforcements were coming, and they wouldn't fall for the same tricks twice. Done! Vrix leapt back as Jessa connected the final wire, their scales flushed with nervous energy. Now would be an excellent time to... The explosion wasn't subtle. A fireball of ignited fuel ripped through the bay doors with concussive force, swallowing the advancing troops whole. The gravity locks shattered under the thermal onslaught, their delicate mechanisms melting like wax under a blowtorch. Somewhere deep in the ship, the Dreadfangs screamed in protest as critical systems failed in cascading waves of destruction. They ran through burning corridors, Z7 cheerfully laying down covering fire with its new toy. The Dauntless's signal grew stronger with every step, its familiar human frequencies cutting through the chaos like a beacon of hope. Then, the hangar. Through the ruined bay doors, Jessa could see human and Zarathian ships, locked in furious combat, their weapons flashing in the dark like angry fireflies. No shuttle, no time. Jessa didn't hesitate. She grabbed Lyran around the waist and jumped into the void. The others followed without question. Vrix with a curse, Taro with a bellow that would have done an ancient warrior, proud, Z7 with something that sounded suspiciously like laughter. They tumbled through the vacuum as Zorak's final order boomed through the comms. Fire everything! The Dreadfang's main batteries unleashed hell directly into its own damaged hull. The resulting explosion lit up space like a tiny supernova, the shockwaves sending the fleeing fugitives spinning wildly toward the waiting Dauntless. As consciousness slipped away, Jessa's last thought was that she really hoped someone on that ship had a good net. The vacuum of space embraced them like a frozen fist, stealing Jessa's breath the instant she launched from the shattered bay doors. Her vision swam with exploding stars as she tumbled end over end, Lyran's panicked grip tightening around her waist hard enough to bruise. The Dreadfang's self-inflicted destruction lit the void behind them, casting long, grotesque shadows across the Dauntless's hull as the human cruiser loomed closer with each passing second. Some detached part of Jessa's oxygen-starved brain noted the absurdity of their situation. A mechanic, a scientist, a smuggler, a warrior, and a psychotic droid, all spinning through space like discarded tools after blowing up the galaxy's most feared warship. Z7's single optic pulsed rhythmically nearby, the droid somehow managing to look amused, even as it cartwheeled through the void. Taro had curled into a protective ball around Vrix, the smuggler's scales already frosting over in the unforgiving cold of space. Then, impact, the sudden, brutal deceleration as they slammed into the Dauntless's emergency catch netting, nearly knocked Jessa unconscious. The specialized polymer fibers stretched dangerously under their combined momentum before snapping back, leaving them tangled together like fish in a net. Through blurred vision, she saw armored figures rushing toward them, their movement slowed by the thick gel coating the recovery bay's interior. "Get them! Dakan! Now!" A muffled voice barked orders through Jessa's fading awareness. Strong hands grabbed her under the arms, dragging her toward an airlock that hissed open with merciful speed. As atmosphere returned with a roar, her lungs convulsed, drawing in sweet, beautiful oxygen even as her body protested the sudden change. The decontamination chamber was a blur of antiseptic spray and medical scans. Jessa coughed up what felt like half her body weight in space dust, while medics swarmed over them, their practiced hands checking vitals and administering emergency treatments. Liren was hyperventilating in the corner, their luminescent skin cycling through distress colors. Vrix looked like they wanted to murder someone, their scales still partially frozen. Only Taro and Z7 seemed unfazed, the former sitting calmly while medics picked shrapnel from his carapace, the latter cheerfully arguing with a technician about keeping its stolen rifle. Then the crowd parted, and Captain Elias Vance of the UNS Dauntless stood before them, his weathered face caught between relief and exasperation. "Cade," he sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose, "I send you out to fix a freighter's drive core, and you start a war with the Zarathian Dominion." Jessa grinned weakly, spitting out another mouthful of debris. "Technically, they started it." Double asterisk.